Every life has a story. Some are told, others wait to be revealed. Stay with us. This is Daily Dose.
What does it feel like to arrive somewhere believing your name is enough, only to discover that somewhere along the way, the name stopped working? That question is at the heart of everything that has unfolded around Prince Harry over these past several weeks. And the more you sit with it, the more it stops being a question about one man and starts becoming something far more universal. Because most of us have, at some point, leaned on something we thought was permanent: a relationship, a reputation, a belief that certain doors, once opened, could never truly close. Prince Harry leaned on his name. He leaned on it the way a man leans on a wall that has been standing for centuries, never once imagining it might move. Welcome to Daily Dose. This is a story about what happens when the foundation shifts. The details, as they have emerged through reporting and public statements, are both dramatic and strangely quiet. There was no single explosion, no televised confrontation, no moment where everything shattered in front of cameras. Instead, there was a terminal, a tablet, an immigration officer, and a visa that had been revoked before the plane even landed. Prince Harry had traveled to Dubai with what, by all accounts, he believed was a legitimate and ambitious business venture. The project, described in reporting as a kind of private energy initiative, was reportedly pitched to Gulf investors as an opportunity to build a small-scale refining operation in one of the most restricted energy markets in the world. The pitch, according to those familiar with it, relied heavily on access, on presence, on the idea that a man with his lineage could navigate doors that others could not. And that, it seems, was precisely where the logic unraveled. Because in the Gulf, where lineage does command reverence, where family names carry the weight of history, the rules around state-controlled resources are not suggestions. They are architecture. They are the load-bearing walls of an entire political and economic system. And when that system looked at the proposal being brought through its doors, it did not see an opportunity. It saw a disruption, and it responded the way systems respond to disruptions. It closed. The visa revocation happened quietly, as these things often do. There was no public announcement, no press conference, just a decision made in rooms that most people will never see, delivered through channels most people will never understand, arriving at a terminal in the form of a red flag on a screen. And Prince Harry, according to reporting, was escorted back to his aircraft. To understand the full weight of that moment, you have to understand what he believed he was walking toward. This was not a casual trip. This was not a speaking engagement or a charity appearance. According to those familiar with the situation, Prince Harry had spent the better part of 18 months building toward this. Cultivating relationships, attending preliminary meetings, assembling a team, preparing materials that laid out a vision for what his involvement could mean. He had been told, or had allowed himself to believe, that his presence alone changed the calculus. That the right investors, shown the right presentation, delivered by the right person, would see not just a business proposal but a symbol. A man who could stand at a podium in the Gulf and represent something that money could not simply purchase on its own. The name, the lineage, the history. And for a period, that belief was not entirely unfounded. There are always people willing to bet on a name. There are always funds, always rooms, always handshakes extended to someone who carries institutional weight, even if that weight has become complicated. The early signals were encouraging enough that the project moved forward. Conversations deepened. Numbers were discussed. The architecture of a deal began to take shape. But deals require due diligence. And due diligence, by its nature, is not interested in symbols. Due diligence is interested in facts, in regulations, in the fine print of state law and international agreement. And when the due diligence came back, when the legal analysis was complete, what it found was not a path forward. It found a wall, a regulatory wall built over decades by governments that had spent generations learning exactly how to protect their most valuable resource from exactly the kind of arrangement being proposed. The project, as described in subsequent reporting, had been constructed on an assumption that the name Sussex could function as a kind of diplomatic solvent, that it could dissolve barriers that existed for everyone else, that the Gulf states, which have their own intricate hierarchies of family and honor, would recognize something in a British prince that would cause them to set aside the frameworks they had built to govern their own affairs. That assumption, it turned out, was not just wrong. It was the kind of wrong that creates consequences. What followed has been described by those watching closely as something of a cascade. Not a single dramatic fall, but a series of smaller collapses arriving one after another, each one triggering the next, the way water finds its way through a structure once the first crack appears. Within days of the Dubai incident, a statement emerged from the royal household. The language, described by observers as unusually precise, did not simply express disappointment. It drew a line. It used words that, in the careful grammar of institutional communication, carry enormous weight. Words chosen not to wound but to define. To say clearly and permanently, here is the boundary, and it has been crossed. The statement reportedly went further, touching on allegations that have since become the most emotionally charged element of this entire story. The suggestion, still described cautiously by most outlets as an allegation, is that in his conversations with potential investors, Prince Harry may have implied that backing his project would mean backing a man with a stable family life. A man who could bring his family to the region, whose children might appear at public events, whose domestic situation was, in other words, an asset. This is the part of the story that silenced rooms. Because there is a difference between leveraging your name and leveraging your children, and the distinction, once raised, could not be quietly set aside. The palace, according to reporting, was shaken, not simply by the business dealings themselves, but by this specific dimension of them. And the response, when it came, was described by those who read it as the kind of language chosen very slowly, very deliberately, by someone who understands that words, once released into the world, cannot be recalled. To understand how the king arrived at that statement, you have to understand something about the nature of the institution he represents. The British monarchy does not move quickly. It is not built for quick movement. It is built for endurance, for absorbing pressure over long periods of time and redistributing it in ways that preserve the core. Every communication that emerges from the palace, every carefully worded sentence in every formal statement, has been reviewed and revised and reviewed again by people whose entire professional lives are devoted to managing exactly these kinds of moments. When something unusual appears in that language, when a phrase is used that has no precedent, it is not an accident. It is a signal, and the signal in this case was unmistakable. The palace was not simply disappointed. The palace was drawing a boundary it intended to hold. Meanwhile, back in California, the financial pressures had already begun to accumulate long before the Dubai trip. Reporting from multiple outlets suggests that the lenders who had been approached to fund elements of the project had grown increasingly cautious. Due diligence reviews, according to those familiar with the matter, had returned findings that called into question whether the project could ever legally proceed. The regulatory landscape in the relevant markets, it seems, made the entire enterprise structurally difficult before a single agreement had been signed. There had reportedly been lawyers, good ones, people who understood the relevant frameworks, who had the experience to see what the analysis would find before the analysis was complete. And according to reporting, those lawyers raised concerns. They asked questions that had no comfortable answers. They recommended caution. They recommended revision. Some of them, it seems, recommended stopping entirely. They were replaced. And this is the detail that keeps appearing in coverage of the situation, the detail that thoughtful observers return to again and again, because it is the detail that tells you something essential about the psychology at work. You do not fire the lawyers who are telling you the truth unless you have already decided that the truth is not what you are looking for. You do not hire lawyers who tell you what you want to hear unless you have already concluded on some level that you know better, that your read of the situation is more accurate than the read of the people whose job it is to understand exactly this kind of situation. Prince Harry, by all accounts, made that decision. He fired the cautious lawyers and hired the optimistic ones, and then he booked the jet. There is something worth pausing on here, because Prince Harry is not a naive man. He has navigated extraordinary complexity. He served in a military that demanded precision and judgment under conditions that most people will never face. He has given interviews that required him to weigh every word against its consequences in real time, in front of global audiences, knowing that anything he said could be clipped and weaponized and played back endlessly. He is not someone who misreads rooms accidentally, and so the question that serious observers have been asking is not how he failed to understand the risks. It is why, understanding them, he moved forward anyway. The answer, according to people who have followed his public journey closely, may lie in something much simpler than arrogance. It may lie in exhaustion. In the particular exhaustion of a man who spent years watching doors open for others and finally decided, somewhere in the quiet of his own reasoning, that this time it would be different. That this time the name would be enough. That this time the world would say yes. But there is another answer too, and it has to do with the peculiar position Prince Harry has occupied since he left the working royal family. Because when you leave an institution and then spend years explaining that leaving, justifying it, building a public identity around the courage it required, you create a trap for yourself. The trap is this: you cannot admit that leaving was a mistake without dismantling the entire narrative. You cannot say I was wrong about this without raising the question of whether you were wrong about everything. And so you keep moving forward. You keep doubling down. You keep betting on the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, because stopping means looking back, and looking back means confronting a version of the story you have not yet prepared yourself to tell. It did not say yes. And now the consequences are arriving with the steady, impersonal rhythm of institutional machinery, doing what it was designed to do. The financial picture, as reported, includes significant creditor claims against the Montecito estate. 2 separate lien notices, according to outlets covering the story, have been filed in California. The amounts involved are substantial. The legal filings cite the Dubai outcome as evidence that the underlying project cannot proceed, which is the kind of argument that courts tend to find persuasive. Foreclosure proceedings, should they reach that stage, could move quickly. And the estate itself, which was purchased as a symbol of a new beginning, a home outside the fishbowl, a place where 2 people could raise their children away from the machinery of the institution, that estate is now caught in the machinery of a different kind of institution. The kind that does not care about symbolism, the kind that cares only about what is owed. The security situation at the residence has also been the subject of reporting. The private security arrangement, according to sources cited in coverage of the story, is reported to have lapsed. The estate, once carefully protected, is described by neighbors as notably quiet. The gates that were once monitored, the cameras that once covered the perimeter, the patrols that once made the property feel like something more than a private home, all of that, according to reporting, has been allowed to wind down as invoices went unpaid and contracts expired without renewal. What that means practically is something that takes a moment to absorb, because the security infrastructure that surrounded the Sussexes was not merely a comfort. It was a necessity. It was the physical expression of a threat assessment that has never been fully made public, but has always been understood by those close to the situation to be serious. And when that infrastructure lapses, when the gates stop closing properly and the cameras stop recording and the patrols stop arriving, the silence that settles over a place is a particular kind of silence. It is the silence of exposure. Separately, the British royal household has reportedly taken steps to withdraw what is described as diplomatic courtesy channels, the informal but significant network of support that members and former members of the royal family have historically been able to access when traveling abroad. Without those channels, travel becomes something different. It becomes the travel of a private citizen, and private citizens, as the Dubai experience demonstrated, are subject to the same rules as everyone else. This withdrawal may sound technical. It may sound like the kind of administrative adjustment that only matters to people who travel in very specific circumstances, but the implications run deeper than they first appear. Because those channels represented a kind of safety net, not just practically, but psychologically. They were the last remaining thread connecting Prince Harry to the institutional support of the family he had left. They were the thing that, even in the most difficult moments, meant that there was someone who would answer the phone, someone who would make the call, someone who knew the right person to speak to when things went wrong in a foreign country. That thread has now been cut. There has been reporting around immigration status as well. The U.S. visa that allows Prince Harry to work, to give paid speeches, to earn a living in the country where he has chosen to make his home, is reportedly under review. The outcome of that review, according to coverage of the matter, could significantly reshape what his daily life looks like. A downgrade, should it occur, would not simply be an inconvenience. It would be structural. It would close doors that currently remain open, and it would do so in a way that is very difficult to reverse. Because once a visa category is downgraded on the basis of a denial from a strategic partner state, the paperwork trail that accompanies that downgrade follows a person for years. It shapes future applications. It creates a history that other countries consult when they make their own decisions. The entertainment industry, which once competed for Sussex partnerships, has grown noticeably quiet. Projects described as in development have been placed on hold. Event invitations have reportedly been withdrawn. The streaming and podcast deals that once seemed to represent a new chapter have not been renewed or replaced. This is how industries communicate when they are uncertain, not with announcements, with silence. And the silence is loud. Because this is an industry that communicates constantly. It is an industry that issues press releases about development deals before the ink is dry, that announces partnerships before the terms have been finalized, that builds anticipation as a product in itself. When that industry goes quiet about someone, when the announcements stop and the bookings dry up and the invitations disappear, the absence speaks more clearly than any statement could. It says we are waiting to see how this resolves. It says we do not want to be caught on the wrong side of a situation that is still moving. It says your name, right now, is a liability. For Prince Harry, whose entire post-royal career has been built on the premise that his name is an asset, that calculation is devastating. Meghan, in the middle of all of this, has been reported to be pursuing her own venture, a lifestyle brand she has been pitching to investors. The effort, by all accounts, is genuine and determined. She has taken meetings. She has prepared materials. She has walked into rooms and made the case for why her name, her audience, her particular combination of celebrity and credibility represents a real business opportunity. And in those rooms, at least initially, there has been interest. But the reporting around the venture suggests that the financial complications surrounding her husband have made investors cautious in ways that are very difficult to negotiate around. Questions arise about liability, about what happens to capital if creditor claims escalate, about whether any new money raised could be subject to claims from existing lenders, about whether the Sussex name, which would be the foundation of the brand's identity and its primary marketing asset, will be on the front page of every major newspaper for reasons that have nothing to do with lifestyle content. Those questions, no matter how carefully answered, tend to make rooms go quiet. And the broader picture that emerges from all of this reporting is one of two people working in parallel, in the same house, toward goals that keep being undermined by a shared set of circumstances that neither of them fully controls. There is something almost unbearably human about that image. Two people who chose each other, who built a life together, who walked away from everything familiar because they believed that together they could build something better, now sitting at opposite ends of a quiet house, on phones that are not ringing the way they used to, waiting for calls that may not come. Meghan has reportedly consulted with advisors about the implications of various scenarios, about what options exist, about what California law would allow under different circumstances. This is not unusual. People in complicated financial situations consult advisors. What makes it notable is the context. Because the context suggests that the question of how to separate financial exposure is being considered seriously, even as the public posture remains one of unity. And friends, according to reporting, say she is genuinely torn, because there is a brand logic that argues for distance. for establishing clearly and publicly that her liabilities are her own, that his decisions were his own, that the revival venture exists independently of the Dubai collapse. And then there is a human logic, a relational logic, that understands what it would mean to step back from a partner during the worst moment of his life, what it would say about the story she has been telling, what it would cost, not just reputationally but personally. This is Daily Dose, and the story that keeps emerging from all of this coverage is not really about oil. It is not really about visas or lien notices or foreclosure timelines. It is about what happens to a person when the story they have been telling about themselves stops being believed. Not by enemies, not by critics, but by the systems that once supported them, by the institutions that once opened their doors, by the investors who once wrote the checks, by the public that once cheered. Because for a long time, the Sussex story was a story about freedom, about a man and a woman who looked at the institution that shaped them and said, "We are choosing something different." And for a significant portion of the public, that story resonated. It resonated because most people understand the feeling of wanting to leave, of wanting to build something new, of believing that love and determination can be enough. But the version of that story that has emerged over these past weeks is something more complicated. It is a story about what you carry with you when you leave, because Prince Harry did not simply leave. He left while keeping the name. He left while keeping the title. He left while continuing to move through a world that still opened its doors, even slightly, because of who he was born to be. And then, when he tried to turn that residual access into capital, he discovered that the doors had conditions attached to them that he had not fully read. The palace, for its part, has been described in recent reporting as having prepared extensively for various contingencies. Documentation related to the welfare of Archie and Lilibet, Prince Harry's children, has been discussed in public reporting with a level of specificity that suggests these preparations are real and not theoretical. The suggestion, reported carefully, is that if circumstances deteriorate to the point where stability cannot be demonstrated, the institution is ready to act, ready to invoke frameworks that have existed for generations for exactly these kinds of moments. The framing around this, from the palace side, is reportedly one of responsibility rather than punishment. The message being communicated, through the careful language of institutional positioning, is that the Crown's first obligation is to the children. That whatever disagreements exist between the monarch and his son, whatever failures of judgment and breakdowns of trust have led to this moment, the children are innocent of all of it, and the children deserve stability. They deserve continuity. They deserve resources that are not subject to the uncertainties currently surrounding their parents. That framing is either deeply compassionate or deeply calculated, and the truth is probably that it is both at once, because institutions do not choose between compassion and calculation. They pursue their objectives through whatever framing serves those objectives best. And in this case, the objective is clear. The monarchy, which has survived wars and abdications and scandals that would have destroyed lesser institutions, intends to survive this too, and it intends to emerge with its reputation for responsibility intact. Among the British public, reporting on surveys and sentiment suggests that opinion, which had been genuinely divided for years, is hardening. The particular allegation about how the children were discussed in investment contexts, even framed carefully as an allegation, seems to have shifted something. Because it is one thing to monetize your own story. It is another thing entirely when the story involves your children. And the public, which extended enormous sympathy across years of tension and uncertainty, which gave Prince Harry and Meghan the benefit of the doubt through Oprah interviews and Netflix documentaries and books that named names and settled scores, that public is now expressing something different. Not hatred, not celebration, something closer to grief maybe, the particular grief of watching someone squander something that was genuinely loved, of watching a person who was given every advantage, every platform, every opportunity, arrive at this moment through choices that did not have to be made. Choices that could have been made differently at dozens of points along the way. Prince William has been notably restrained throughout. His public comments, when they have come, have been brief and precise. The phrasing that has circulated most widely, private exploits masquerading as royal duty, is the kind of sentence that stays in the air long after it has been spoken. Not because it is vicious, because it is accurate, because it names, quietly and completely, the contradiction that has been at the center of the Sussex enterprise since the beginning. And William's restraint itself is a kind of statement, because this is a man who has been the subject of public criticism, who has been characterized in ways he cannot have found comfortable, who has watched his family name used as a marketing asset by people who simultaneously describe that family as toxic. And throughout all of it, he has said very little. He has stayed disciplined. He has let the machine do its work. And when he finally did speak, the brevity of his words was part of their power. He did not explain. He did not defend. He simply named the thing and let the naming do its work. You cannot build a brand on the thing you are escaping. You cannot criticize the institution while spending its currency. You cannot walk away from the family and then return to the family's name every time you need a door to open. And you cannot, in the end, ask the world to believe that you are something entirely new while relying entirely on what you have always been. The machine, as it has been called in some reporting, is not emotional about any of this. It does not hate Prince Harry. It does not want him to suffer. Institutions do not have those capacities. What they have is function. And the function of the monarchy, the thing it has been doing for longer than most nations have existed, is to survive, to adapt, to protect the core from threats that emerge from outside and, when necessary, from inside. When Prince Harry tried to use the institutional weight for private profit, when he tried to trade on the access that came with his lineage in ways that created diplomatic and legal complications the institution had not authorized and could not endorse, the machine did what machines do. It ejected the foreign element. It adjusted its mechanism. It continued. And Prince Harry, in the quiet of whatever rooms he is currently occupying, is sitting with the particular silence of someone who has run out of moves. The conference calls with specialists who are running out of options. The conversations about agreements that require collateral that no longer exists. The waiting for courts to schedule hearings, for reviews to conclude, for decisions to arrive that he cannot influence and can only respond to. This is not the life he imagined. This is not the freedom he was seeking. This is something much harder than either staying or leaving. This is the cost of the in-between. There are deadlines approaching. There are hearings scheduled. There are reviews underway. Each one represents a door that will either open or close, and the number of doors that remain open is decreasing with a consistency that, once you see it, is very difficult to look away from. But beyond the deadlines, beyond the legal machinery and the financial reckoning, there is something that no court can adjudicate, and that is the question of who Prince Harry will be on the other side of all this. Because systems resolve, debts are settled or discharged, visas are reviewed and decisions are made. Children grow up, regardless of where they live or what agreements govern their lives. The machine keeps running. What cannot be recovered so easily is a story. Once a narrative collapses, rebuilding it requires something more than a press release or a carefully placed interview. It requires time. It requires accountability. It requires the kind of honesty that is very difficult when you have spent years constructing a public identity around a particular version of yourself. The version where you were the brave one, the one who saw clearly, the one who chose love over duty and walked into the light. That version of the story is still available to Prince Harry, but reaching it now would require something that the current posture makes very difficult. It would require admitting that the people who warned him were right, that the lawyers he fired were right, that the institution he spent years criticizing had rules that existed for reasons, that the family he left, whatever its failures and complications, understood something about the weight of the name that he, in his determination to monetize it, had not. That admission, if it comes, will not come easily, and it will not come quickly, but it may be the only path forward that leads somewhere other than where the current trajectory is heading. Daily Dose will continue following every development as this story moves toward its next chapter, because this is not simply royal drama. This is a case study in the distance between who we believe we are and who the world eventually reveals us to be. And that distance, in Prince Harry's case, has turned out to be very wide indeed. So we return to where we began. What does it feel like to arrive somewhere believing your name is enough? Maybe the more honest question is this: what do you do when you finally understand that the name was never yours to spend, that it was borrowed, that the loan had terms you never fully read, that the doors you walked through so easily were never truly open? They were simply unlocked by people who trusted you to walk carefully, and who are now, quietly and methodically, changing the locks. Prince Harry is standing somewhere between those questions right now. The answers, if they come, will not arrive all at once. They will arrive the way all real reckonings do. Quietly, one door at a time.
If this story moved you, leave a like and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to know. The truth continues tomorrow. Until then, this was your daily dose